Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your care for our state and our country. Thank you for Steve and how well he represents us. Lord, we pray your presence in this meeting tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And the conversation tonight is on the Monday Mega site. It's regarding chips that you put in your phones or computers or in vehicles. They were looking at, Sandisk was going to build it in Mundy Township, which is just outside of Flint. What will be done with that site remains to be seen. It's about 1,300 acres. It's a 2 mile by 1 mile rectangle. And there are a lot of houses on the perimeter, and then there's one neighborhood of about 100 houses, a medium-sized neighborhood on that site. It is called Site Ready, according to the people who are looking to develop on it. I did ask in committee a couple weeks ago, how is it site ready? If there's a couple hundred houses in that area. From their perspective, from a land perspective, it is flat. So from a development perspective, that's nice. There's not a whole lot of water. There's one pond that's, I didn't even see the pond, but I see it on Google Maps. I went there, and I'll get into that story about me going and looking at it. And then there's a tiny little creek that I don't know what their exact plan would be, but that's pretty close to the perimeter as well. So in terms of geography and being close to highways and a railroad, those things are true. But there are a lot of houses there, and there would be a lot of displacement. It's not site ready. There's a lot of crops. Actually, when I was there a week ago today, no, it was Tuesday, it was less than a week ago, is when I went, and they were growing soybeans. I would say 80% of that 2 square mile area is being used currently for growing food. So it's not site ready, it's not bulldozed and flattened and ready to roll. There's resources on it, and it's prepared to be used, if not destroyed, for resources next year to grow more crops. So that is part of what would have to be displaced, but if a company wants to move in and build chips, and they're going to make an investment and sell their product, more power to them if that's all there is to it. But there is a lot more, and I want to share the perspective. Also, a lot of this is covered in committee because I chair a committee on corporate subsidies and state investments. So we tackle this topic for an hour and a half on 3 different occasions. So there's almost 4.5 hours of content on this specific conversation on the Monday Mega site. And I do clip a lot of those. Some of you may see on my state representative Steve Carra page, we clip those into little bite-sized pieces. People like those a lot more. The full hour and a half, maybe a few hundred people watch, but then on a good clip, I get anywhere between 1,000 people on the low end to 100,000 or 1 million if it goes viral. So the clips are what people like, not the full hour and a half. But we're going to have a conversation and answer Q&A tonight, digging into it further. One of my surprises when I was there last week was, well, let's just start with, before I get into the surprises, I started in the city of Flint because I wanted to get a pulse from the community of what their thoughts were. But Mundy Township is a smaller township, close to Flint, but a little bit on the outskirts. So I went into the city of Flint and door knocked 40 houses. The vast majority of people I talked with, I was surprised. I thought there might be a little bit more in support than opposed, but I only got 1 in support and 0 opposed. What I got a lot of were people who had no clue what I was talking about. That was the surprise. And then I went to Burton, and it was the same thing. Hardly anybody supportive, hardly anybody opposed, but it's only 25 houses, so between the city of Flint and then in Burton and Grand Blanc, I probably would have talked to about 25 people combined in the 3, 20 to 25. And of those, there's just a few in support, a couple opposed, but more in support, but about 15 just not even knowing what I'm talking about with it. Once I got into Mundy Township, that changed. There were 3 answers: opposed, supportive, and instead of not informed on the issue, it was, I'm not going to talk about it. And rude way, but I have nothing to say, or my lips are sealed. Those types of answers. Well, that's interesting. Because a lot of these deals have non-disclosure agreements signed. And those non-disclosure agreements are usually signed by the Flint and Genesee Area Economic Alliance or the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And those people who are looking to build these massive, massive projects using a whole lot of taxpayer resources, which I'll get into. But the surprising thing is the fact that the homeowners are signing non-disclosure agreements. And that's not because they're part of the overall scheme. The overall scheme is being put onto them. So when you live in Maple Creek Preserve, which is on that 2 square mile area, and they come to you and say, hey, you know, we're looking at doing this massive project, but your neighborhood's in the way, and we want to bulldoze your house and put a plant here, and we want to make this happen. And they're like, well, this is my house. I don't want to move. And if their house is a $325,000 house, and they tell them, well, hey, we'll give you a nice price, but you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can't tell people how much money we gave you. They're not giving them millions, but they're giving them close to twice, sometimes over twice market value for the house. And that's not just from the private company making that decision. That's paid for with taxpayer dollars. A unique thing that I saw in Maple Creek Preserve was there were new houses that were maybe about a third of the houses between 4 years old on the oldest and brand new on the newest for that third. The other 2/3 were maybe 20, 25-year-old houses. They'd been there a couple decades. They weren't old, but a newer neighborhood, but not brand new. But these new houses that were brand new, there's one house that's been demolished so far as of Tuesday of last week in that neighborhood. That was a house that was started to be built May of this year. And then they tore it down July of this year. So nobody had moved into it yet. They didn't have a homeowner to buy out on it. It was, you know, still under construction by Ellen Edwin. And so that was easier to, they were building it, and one day they just demolished it in July. That's the only house that's destroyed in the neighborhood as of 6 days ago. There are about 50 houses that are destroyed on the perimeter. So if you have your busier country roads that make up that 2 mile by 1 mile rectangle, there would be probably 100 houses, maybe a little bit more, in that big perimeter, or at least there were. And I would say a third, or maybe a quarter, have been demolished on the perimeter already. And then the other big thing that's been demolished is a church. In terms of taking up space from the perimeter, that church did have a long driveway that went a quarter of a mile, probably closer to a third of a mile, into that rectangle. And so the church was very offset from the road. And so if you are going to build a massive building, those perimeter houses, it's like, do you really need all the way to the perimeter, or would 90% of that 2 square mile massive area be sufficient for your massive building, and, you know, still keep the perimeter houses, you would think. But that church would probably actually get in the way more so of the development there, just because it was more centralized into the rectangle. But it was sad to see a perfectly good church destroyed. It is destroyed. It was very recently demolished before I got there, and I saw the bulldozer still sitting there. It was done in the past week prior to me being there, so less than 2 weeks ago, I believe, is when it was demolished. And then after I did that, I talked to people in Lundy Township, both in Maple Creek Preserve and along the perimeter. And then just north of Maple Road, which is the street on the north side of the proposed development area, I went into Flint Township, just walking distance from Lundy Township. And they're people who, they are arguably biased because they live out in more of a country type feel. They didn't sign up for this massive industrial building that is just like I can't do justice for how big of a project it is. It was a $63 billion type of project. I'll get into the taxpayer funded end later, which is not $63 billion, but you'll be surprised how close to that it is. And those neighbors were the most opposed. Because in the area where they're signing the non-disclosure agreements, some of them support it. Because my house, bought it for about $300,000. If I could sell my house for $600,000, I might say, hey, you know, like, I'm happy where I live now, but for 600 grand, I'll figure something else out. That'll work for me. So they had that bias inside, but the people just across the street who have this new development that is not the type of, you know, what they signed up to live near, they're passionately opposed. But one of the guys who was there said, he said, I understand that he said, I'm opposed, but I understand that I'm biased because I live so close to it, kind of like the not in my backyard type of thing. But he said, based on what I know about this project, beyond the fact that it's my backyard, I'm opposed as well. And the reason why is just because I see the level of corruptness in it. Not just that the locals are signing non-disclosure agreements, but that Maple Creek Preserve neighborhood, guess how many people on that HOA board live in that neighborhood? Out of 5. One. And she's older than any of you in the room. And so she's still on it, and then they have 4 people who are part of the Flint and Genesee Economic Alliance and or their buddies who are involved in this project. 4 out of the 5 of them are on that HOA board. It just seems like a conflict of interest in terms of stacking that HOA board for the purpose of demolishing that neighborhood, for the purpose of bringing in a project funded by taxpayers.
Is somebody actually going to come in?
SanDisk backed out, and this is the deal they were given. They were given $6.24 billion in state funding was the deal. Some of that was called SSRP, which is Strategic Site Readiness Project. Some of it CIP, which is Critical Industry Project, I believe, CIP. Those are both parts of the SOAR fund, and then they were also given some other money that equated up to $6.24 billion from the state. Their local tax abatements they were going to get over the course of 50 years was $18 billion in local tax abatements. $18 billion.
50 years?
50 years of tax abatements. And then $16 billion from the federal government, which was $3 to $5 billion from the CHIPS Act, and then another $13 billion in federal funding. All that was proposed to them to SanDisk. And despite all of that money, which is $40 billion in assistance, despite $40 billion in assistance, they said, no, we don't want to do it. And when you're getting that much money and still turn something down, that is a very centralized planning operation. That's not free markets. That is using taxpayer resources to try to push something on a society. There are concerns, just to give a brief, society perspective of it, of technological advancements, and we don't want to rely on places like China and Russia or people like that to lead the technological advancements. We need to build some of these things at home. That way, if things go south, we can still sustain our computers and cars and technological things that we like to have in our society. So there's those types of arguments, but the expense for this is astronomical. SanDisk did back out. There are other companies who are supposedly looking at it, what they might be offered. I haven't heard. It's not public information. And when they're offered $6.24 billion, it's like, well, by who? Because I hadn't heard anything about it until the deal fell through. And that $6.24 billion would have needed legislative approval before it went through anyway.
How much have they spent to this point?
So they've gotten $259 million. They got $9 million early on, which is an inconsequential number compared to $40 billion, and then they got $250 million more. Those were last term. The Democrats approved those. For the SOAR funds, they have to be approved by the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. So the Democrats last term did approve that $250 million. And of that $250 million, they've spent the majority of it. What I don't know yet, and I would like to know, is I believe a lot of that money that they've spent is probably tied up in those contracts with the non-disclosure agreements with the homeowners we'll pay you $625,000 for that house that we'll demolish in the future, assuming that that comes to fruition. And then you do that 100 times, and that gets pretty pricey. And so that's where I think a lot of that money from that strategic site readiness project, SSRP money, has gone, but that's unclear to me yet. But they've spent, allegedly, it's above 150 million of the 250. And in terms of on the site, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A, the last thing that I saw there was on the center, on the north side, on Maple there, was their, I guess, headquarters for their construction. They had a trailer, like if anybody has like a mobile trailer, they had about a trailer size, it was like an office space trailer, portable. And they had a barn that was about the size of a house. They had 3 white trucks. They had a couple of Caterpillars and another bulldozer. And they had like a couple of propane tanks and 1 porta pot. And they had one other thing, they had a surveillance camera. So they have all these non-disclosure agreements signed all over the place, but then the one time they're all interested in, what's going on and having things observable is themselves looking in, having their cameras right there on their 20-foot pole, and they have their no trespassing signs up. So I didn't go to it, I stood from the road and saw about 50 meters away, I saw their little headquarters, which is pretty minuscule when you're talking $250 million in terms of what they had done and what their headquarters looked like. The only thing that's largely changed that I could see on that 2 square mile plot was the 50 demolished houses on the outside, the 1 demolished house in the neighborhood, and then the church. And then the school is not demolished yet. It cost $40 million to, just coincidentally, 1/1000th of the overall $40 billion in taxpayer assistance. It would cost $40 million to tear down that school and build it somewhere else. Perfectly fine school.
Crazy.
Yes, Q&A time.
Who is it this headquarters, who does that belong to? Does that belong to the company that backed out, or is that a government operated headquarters?
Yeah, good question. I would say who would be in charge of that headquarters? I would guess would be the Flint Genesee Economic Alliance at this point. It's
What's it called, the Flint?
Genesee Economic
Flint
Alliance.
Genesee.
It's their local arm
Yeah,
of
I
the
get it.
BDC. And
We have one here at Kalamazoo, the Southwest Mission First,
yes,
and they do a good job here. Now, I built 6 to 7 buildings a year that are, to me, it's $5 million. And the whole project, like some of the Palmer's building over here, they're putting $17 million into this project. They get no government assistance at all except for a 10-year 50% tax break, which is normal for this Southwest Michigan. Everybody Kalamazoo and Sturgis
and that doesn't add up to $40 billion, does it?
No, well, it doesn't add up to anything other than and the schools get their money out of it. But it's, for a company to build, they normally get a 50% tax break, which is really the only advantage that they get at all. And Portage is the same way, and Kalamazoo, they're all the same. But these guys are, it's a piece of property that they had or something you're buying from the Sturgis Economic Development. But just a couple of years ago, you could buy land in Sturgis, and we built a big tire warehouse over here. They paid $4,500 an acre. Now the same ground is $30,000 an acre in Sturgis because of the stupid marijuana, and then the trailer factory wanted to move in here, so it quadrupled the price of land in Sturgis. In Kalamazoo, the same way, the land goes way up. But these people go out and get their own financing, they build their own buildings, they try not to cop out of the government at all. And one thing we're having a real problem with right now is that the new energy code, they're making them do and we get Portage for the new PD building, they want them to do a box test, which means you have to put fans blowing in the building, and you can only have so much air loss in the building, and it's an air box test. And they do it in houses a lot, but now they're trying to do it in commercial buildings, which it's going to cost $25,000 to do that. You have to seal the building. It's not insulation value, it's sealing every little joint and everything else so you can put up and like overhead doors. Then you can go through and they could put all these fans and roof fans and exhaust fans and stuff like that in, that's gonna, it's just a stupid thing that the Construction Code Commission in the state of Michigan has adopted. And now that all the towns are gonna take that on, that's gonna be real expensive and just chase people out of Michigan, something fierce. You can go to Indiana with no insulation restrictions whatsoever. We're putting 14 inches in the roof and 8 inches in the sidewall buildings, where in Indiana you put 4 in the walls and 6 in the roof. And so that's just gonna chase companies out of Michigan.
Right, and that's one of the ways we can better attract companies to Michigan is to have less regulations, a workforce that's ready, good infrastructure, reliable energy. Those are the types of things that developers are interested in, a business-friendly environment where they can thrive. But here we have a bad economy, bad regulations, a bad environment in Michigan, and then we try to attract them with billions and billions and billions of dollars. It would create 9,400 jobs, by the way, is what it was going to be, the proposal with Sandisk up in Flint. 9,400 jobs for $40 billion. We're talking that big of a number. That's, and everything else goes unseen. How much we're paying out of our pockets in order to subsidize that type of project. What could we have done had we spent that money in our community somewhere else? What type of economic productivity would have happened in the marketplace had we not had our money taken from for that massive project over in Flint, where the locals in Mundy Township and Flint Township nearby, they're like, we don't want this. You see that they're not complying with Deagle. Anybody else who doesn't comply with Deagle, it's a pain in the butt. Deagle will slow you down, hold you back on permits, make your life miserable. But when they out there in Mundy Township mess up with Deagle, they just press forward, and it's like Deagle's like kind of like turns a blind eye to it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, you guys didn't follow code, and that's all right, just kind of keep doing what you're doing. And they get a free pass, whereas anybody else, we'd get our butts kicked for not complying.
So the $250 million that has probably gone to the Flint, Genesee Economic Alliance, that money is gone. And so what's
It's 170 about.
I mean, as far as recovery of it?
Yeah, and we can't recover it. I don't know if it's already been spent.
What's the prognosis for the site or something else?
Well, and there were some people who were opposed up there who were like, well, now that we've already done this, we might as well do something. But again, from what I saw visually, in terms of the infrastructure laid, unless I'm missing it, and my understanding is they haven't really done a big infrastructure change. What has changed is 50 houses demolished and 1 church demolished, and then that tiny little $1 million operation of a barn and a trailer.
So there's no sewer or public municipal water or anything?
That's been reorchestrated. I mean, they have what they had.
You'd have to put a water tower in for a building that size. You'd have to have your own water tower.
They haven't, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, they have not put strategic site readiness project money towards infrastructure upgrades. It's been demolishing. That's what I've seen and heard.
I want to know, what is the purpose of doing this? I mean, 50, how many billion? I'm surprised it's billions.
It'd be 40 billion in tax breaks and or incentives.
Okay, but the cost of the subsidy that we're giving this place, it's a lot of money.
That's what it is.
It's about half of the state budget for the year.
Half of the state budget. Okay, so what is going to be produced? What is going to happen in this valuable territory? What is the benefit of having to do it?
The volume of microchips that we would build for our phones and computers and cars, I don't have an exact answer on what they're supposed to have in terms of manufacturing output,
Yeah.
other than the output that you get from 9,400 jobs. But it'd be a lot of those.
The state of Tennessee was probably doing the same thing. They probably had a mega site in Tennessee, or in the one in Texas too. So it's not just Michigan, all these companies they're going out and seeing who will spend the most amount of money for them.
Correct, and this was the third or fourth biggest in our nation's history subsidy. Boeing, I believe, got a bigger one. Micron, and there might have been one other. But this was the third or fourth
Why don't the big factories have to follow the state minimum and maximum for tax abatements?
The state minimums and maximums, I mean, there's 50% tax abatements is what it often is. Are you suggesting that you think this one's getting 100% tax abatement?
Well, what I've been reading is the minimum tax abatement is 3 years and the maximum you're allowed to get for tax abatement is 10 years.
They're getting them for much longer than that, 25, 30, 50 years.
Can I ask why? Do you know?
Gretchen Whitmer.
I like just uniform across the board tax rates. That's my perspective. I believe that's the constitutional way of equal opportunity for everybody. But yeah, that's a long time to get an abatement. Absolutely. The one here in the city of Sturgis, we had that development that went up here. I think they got that demolished for like $1. The people who would be paying property taxes out of there, they're not paying their property tax exempt. So building this 5-story downtown here in Sturgis, there were like 3 or 4 different elements to it that made it financially lucrative to build. Whereas if it was just, I want to buy that property, I want to demolish this segment of downtown that's already there and develop something bigger and create this and then, have people live in it, have a business or two on the ground level, and then run my free market enterprise, that'd be a different story. But he got a lot of special deals here for this downtown Sturgis.
But he has 250 employees in the area too.
He got a special deal on that one.
No, but he still has employees here, he's paying every day.
Yeah.
He's a big employer in the area, one of the largest. So, it's not, he got a lot of stuff he shouldn't have got, but either way.
Yes.
I was just curious, what's on the upside of this whole thing? You say Sandisk is pulled out, they've got other people shopping the deal now. What's in it for the neighborhood? How many jobs are being created? What's the income stream look like?
Well, in a new proposal, I'm guessing it'll probably be smaller than that 9,400 proposal. That's just my speculation, is something smaller probably coming up. Could it be 6,000, 5,000? Maybe, if it's going to be a mega site still, that this isn't a small, this is a massive industrial operation. And what the economic development argument would be is when you have a 2 mile by 1 mile open vast space that is right next to these highways and right next to that railroad and has a big enough population base around it, because there's a lot of people in the Flint area that they could absorb that type of massive project. They do have some arguments that from a site perspective, there's a lot going for it. I made the arguments of what's not going for it. And there still could be something. I mean, you would be destroying the perfectly fine farm fields, which, is inconvenient. And with people like Bill Gates running around, I get a little bit nervous the more and more I see our farm fields go to things other than, making food. There's just too many globalists and population control people who I don't think pairs well with us not building or growing crops in America. But there could be something. I don't know if it'd be microchip related with another company or something else. But that's all conversations that all I hear is those conversations are ongoing, and that's like the extent of what I hear. But a lot of these companies who are making these decisions, they want all that in confidence as they're considering their economic decision. They don't want their potential competitors to know, if I went with this project, what would I need to develop? Another company might then say, well, I can do it for less, and then they're kind of cutting into each other's potential profit margins from the type of deal they can make with the state of Michigan. But the more the state of Michigan and or the federal government and or the locals get involved with the special deals, the more it takes us away from free markets and honest trade and towards central planning.
Do you have a breakdown of federal, state, and local dollars?
For Monday,
Yeah.
it's 6.24 for state, 18, these are all billion, 18 for local, and that's tax abatements, not taxes on other states are doing it, so we should do it too, you know, that way some money comes back to our state as well, and those types of arguments are made, but even that 16 billion, when you divide that by us being about 1/30th of the population of America, if you take 16 billion divided by 30, that's 533 million. But we don't have as high of we don't have as much money as some of the other states. So instead of 533 million, I'd say about 400 million. So roughly about $400 million of that $16 billion from the federal government would be federal money that came out of the state of Michigan and went to the federal government, whereas about 15.6 billion of the 16 would have came from the other 49 states.
Just
So
doing,
if you add that 400 million to the 6.24, it'd be 6.64, which does change it by 7%.
just doing some quick calculations, it looks like you took that, basically the $40 billion and divided by 99,400 jobs, and said over 40 years, every one of those employees would have to make over $100,000 a year, even to break even on all the money put into it.
But that company would never stay 40 years. They might run 12, 14 years.
Well, I know that,
shut
but I
that
mean,
down.
just,
After that big of an investment.
Yeah, they do it all the time.
Yeah.
Because the money doesn't make any difference anymore to these globalists.
Yep. And, to that extent, it's the amount of jobs, the big projects that the MEDC has worked towards, the National Center for Public Policy, there was something like 123,000 jobs were promised from their big deal since 2000, and of which it's like 11,000 of them have actually been delivered. So 9% of the jobs that they promised for the investments actually came to fruition. 91% of their promises fell short in terms of employment levels.
What's happened to Big Rapids and Marshall?
Yeah, I don't have exact details. The Goshen one, I think, is less likely to come to fruition. Marshall more likely, but neither, I think, are done deals. I'd say Goshen's more likely to fall through, and Marshall might be more likely to still happen.
But Goshen is Big Rapids.
Goshen is Big Rapids.
Yeah.
And then Cattle is Marshall.
But they changed boards, and so that kind of did that one, yeah.
It didn't help up in Goshen, correct, for that project.
Well, you know, one thing is, when you, the state got these non-disclosure agreements, I have a problem with that. I mean, the homeowner gets twice the amount that the value of his property. But when you transfer property, the deed gets recorded at the county level, and it's for tax purposes, of course. And so that is recorded. That amount that they get paid has to be recorded at a county level. That can't be, that's public knowledge.
Well, yeah, but then that could be kind of after the fact though, right? So when those deeds and everything go through, so they have the contracts, they haven't yet, so those houses, a lot of those homeowners are still living in the house.
Yeah, I understand.
And so they have a contract, well, while they're negotiating and or setting the numbers with the community members and or there's public sentiment around it, they want it to be on the down low as much as possible. Once the deeds and everything get transferred, and after the project's already been done, and after everyone's displaced and their houses are bulldozed, and then people want to go and check the deeds at the local
And
register.
then they can find out.
But that's 4 months later. That's after the fact. Like
They moved to Tennessee or Florida.
that's old. It's old news by that point. So they need those NDAs for like right now, not in
Yeah,
4 months.
right.
And also what I did hear from the NDAs also is having signed NDAs, some of those homeowners were still a little bit, they still said a little bit. They'd say things like, oh yeah, it's about twice market value, but I can't tell you the exact amount. Some would say, I know a neighbor who said they got over twice market value. I had others who just said that was $200,000 above market value was the lowest I heard. So 325 going for 525. Those were the numbers I was hearing in those ranges. But then another thing I heard was in the contract that they could, so Maple Hill is basically the entity that's created for this. This Maple Hill LLC was created like a year and a half ago, seemingly obviously for the purpose of this project. But they're friends of the Flint Genesee Economic Alliance. So Maple Hill is the group that's buying up these houses, and Maple Hill
though they may have these big dreams of doing something, when you don't have the taxes, the church wasn't paying taxes anyhow, but 50 houses were paying, you know,
Right.
$2,500 to $8,000 taxes, depending on what you're paying there. That township is lost now.
Yep, it's lost all that, and if they don't end up building something, then it ends up a loss for the Mundy Township at that point.
But will the people who, the house was bulldozed, but they still own the property until the whole thing is done?
No, they're gone.
Once it's bulldozed,
Once
but most of those houses are still up.
but the person who bought it owns it then, so they're gonna pay property tax on the property.
Yeah, Maple and Hills, yeah, so Maple and Hill, once it had that house on there, it would have had a higher taxable value. Now that it's bulldozed, if you've got a $20,000 lot, it's not gonna be as much in property taxes.
If taxpayer money is being used, why is there no follow through with the state if we're doing abatements and the state's giving out money? Why isn't the state going, okay, you're not doing this, you need to get in compliance with this? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
In compliance with what?
Like, let's say
Legal or something?
let's say you give me $50, but you say you have to sweep the floors or do this, and if I don't do that, there should be something.
So, yeah, so they kind of got in over their head, right? Because they gave that $250 million for the SSRP to make the site ready. And so right now, the general theory is they're making that 2 square mile area ready. And they were overextended. So I think that's what you're getting at is how can the state of Michigan and or the MEDC, which is under the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, which is under Gretchen Whitmer. So basically, the head boss in the MEDC decisions, if the MEDC is under the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, which is part of the executive branch, this is Gretchen Whitmer's baby. So Gretchen Whitmer is the one at fault here. The buck stops at her desk for what the MEDC does under her administration. And if they're going around basically making the assumption that they've got a done deal with SanDisk or another company, and then they don't make good on their plan, which they didn't have the right to make anyway, because we didn't legislatively appropriate the funds for this project. So they were overextended in negotiating with a private company in terms of what taxpayer assistance they were going to get before there was even certainty that the legislature was going to appropriate the necessary funds for the project. So yeah, in terms of that accountability and over-promising and under-delivering, it's a huge problem. They were very overextended. They went way beyond the scope of what's appropriate.
It was an all-Democratic government at that point, though.
It's all Democrat on this. The Republicans have done this too, yes, in terms of these big corporate subsidies. But the appropriations committees were under Democrat trifecta last term, who appropriated that $250 million. And then the $6.24 billion, like this whole plan that they created with SanDisk, what they were going to give them. We have a Republican control in the House right now, but we weren't part of that negotiation and saying we agreed to it yet. There had not been a formal vote of the legislature to appropriate that money. And not only had there not been a formal vote, we didn't know anything about it until it came out in the news that this is what the offer is. We knew there was something going on there, but we didn't know what. It was all secret.
So that's half of the state budget was cooked.
It equates, yeah, nobody could,
Was there approval by the legislature?
it would equate to it.
That's for 1 year, this is
Yes.
a 50-year thing.
Yes. So to put that,
amount of money.
yes, it's a good way to look at it, just to kind of get an idea for how big of a number that is. If the Republican House proposed a $78.5 billion budget, and this is $40 billion, it's over half of the budget. But like Jim's saying, that's just kind of looking at it from a size perspective. But if it's a tax abatement for 50 years, a lot of that $40 billion is in them only paying half of their taxes for 5 decades. And so that's a big chunk of it. Half of their taxes, but a lot more in taxes than they were getting from the 200 houses. You're paying you get a 50% tax abatement, but you're paying billions and billions in taxes, which they otherwise weren't. That's a lot more money that Mundy Township would be getting, but that's a lot of tax roll money from the state of Michigan that we all were subjected to pay. If you're to take that $6.24 billion, just to equate it back that way, to look at it from a different way, for every $100 billion, for every $1 billion, for every $1 billion, you divide that by 10 million people, that's $100, because we have 10 million people in Michigan, that's $100 from every man, woman, and child. So $6 billion would be $600 from every man, woman, and child on average. So a family of 5, for that $6.24 billion, which is just part of that $40 billion incentive program, that is $3,000 on average from a family of 5. Now, if you ask a family of 5 here in St. Joseph County, would you rather have $3,000 more for your family, or have $3,000 taken from you and given to a company up in Flint? I'm guessing most of them would say, I'd rather have $3,000 more in our pocket.
Can they back up to the 250 mil?
Yes.
Have those funds already been awarded and spent?
Yeah, and so
That's water over the neighborhood.
It's partly. So it's already been awarded, and so that was it's this weird thing under the SOAR program, which is like Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve. And so like that's supposed to be a bunch of money to try to get these big projects to come to Michigan. It's called SOAR, S-O-A-R. And then a subset of SOAR is the SSRP, which is that Site Readiness Program. And that's what that $250 million was, to get that site ready. And of that $250 million, it is subject to approval by the appropriations committees in the House and Senate. So last term, when the Democrats had control, they had a majority in both chambers. The appropriations committee said, yes, we want to appropriate $250 million to figure out what to do there in Mundy Township for this big mega site project.
Okay,
So that was appropriate.
So, did anyone get a case of heartburn when Sandus pulled the plug?
A lot of people did, yes. A lot of people did. And of that $250 million, not all of it, it's about 170, 180 million spent. There'd be about 70 or 80 million that's unspent currently. But I think, but what I don't know is, I think a lot of the money built into those contracts to the homeowners, I think a lot of that is that SSRP money. And while we're speaking my knowledge, I'm trying to get that answer is, because there's that Maple and Hill LLC that was just created, and I'm guessing, because Maple and Hill has all this money to buy up all these houses for this project, where are they getting that money from? I'm guessing that's that SSRP money to give to Maple and Hill, because they're handing out these big checks to the homeowners to buy up their houses for way over market value, overpriced, some of which those contracts can still be backed out of.
And they had no assurance that anything was going to take place.
Correct.
So something smelled.
They were overextended, made the assumption that it was going to happen, and as if the legislature didn't even have a say in it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's say a random amount, let's say $10,000 is spent in the taxpayers' money. Is there any way to put a terms and conditions on that? Let's say we give you $10,000, but you have to have this much done in 10 years, kind of like the Planning Commission does with special land permits.
There can be performance metrics, and those are built in certain circumstances with this, that at this point you get more money, at this point you get more money, and it's basically merit-based or performance-based concepts. Those are pretty weak in terms of the performance-based metrics that they use, but that's the MEDC who's setting those. So the MEDC sets that for their friend companies who they are awarding these big projects to. And then clawback provisions is another thing similar to what you're talking about, is if you end up not doing what you said you're going to do, can you claw back that money? Well, that money that's been spent with SSRP funds, you can't claw back if it's been spent. So of that $250 million, a lot of that is gone, and we cannot claw it back because they did not meet their expectations.
Well, they never really had an expectation. They never had a company in the first place that actually signed a dotted line. Now, in Sturgis, they built this big trailer factory out here, and then they shut the trailer factory down. Well, they lost their tax break, so they had a 50% tax break. And now that it's shut down, there's no employees, they have to pay that, the company has to pay the tax breaks back to the city of Sturgis, because they never kept with their employees. And it was one that we built this over the state line, and LaGrange County gave them a tax break, and then they didn't, Cruiser, same company, never opened up. They're still paying $70,000 a month on the lease, plus the property taxes, and LaGrange County took the tax break away, and so now they went to full taxes on the building, so.
Yeah, so more clawback provisions in that circumstance.
But that's local buildings, and that's how they run local stuff here. But the state, they're just, so how are we gonna get our $4,500 back on our coffee maker from our governor's little buddy that got a bunch of money?
From Fay Bay Dune. Yeah, that's another big one. Dana Nessel even came out, Attorney General, Democrat. She came out and said, basically, with Fay Bay Dune and everything that's going on with that and the MEDC stuff, she's like, we should freeze the money that's going, we should consider freezing the money that the MEDC is getting while we have all this controversy over the Fay Bay Dune situation and some of this drama. And I think, that was great to hear her say that. I'm calling for abolishing the MEDC altogether, so I'm actually working on that legislation as we speak. So freezing their money is great. Completely abolishing MEDC, I think, is even better. But for those of you who don't know, the Fay Dune, just to give you a little more context on it too, I'm sure. Fay Bay Dune, it's called Global Link. And you guys know how Gretchen Whitmer is going overseas often?
All over.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll take a quick poll. How many of you think that it is A, that Gretchen Whitmer is going overseas saying, we have the best, workforce, education is just amazing in Michigan. Our workforce is just ready to go. They're coming out of high school and college, just ready to kick butt, and they're ready to go. We've got great roads, reliable energy. Our regulatory environment is very business friendly. You guys, while I'm over here overseas visiting you guys, I want to invite you to move to Michigan because things are great in Michigan. Do you think that's what she's doing? Or do you think she's saying more like, hey, we'll give you $6.24 billion in state subsidies, and we already talked with the locals, and they'll give you a special tax abatement worth $18 billion. We know the CHIPS Act's $3 to $5 billion, plus another $13 billion from the federal government. We've got our connections, we know how to get you these special tax breaks that everybody else doesn't get. Yes, the economy sucks in Michigan, but for you, with this special deal, we're going to entice you off the taxpayer's expense. Which do we think is more like A or B?
A.
My thing about this
You failed. You have to come back next week, we'll try again.
There's a lot of areas of Michigan that are really hot. I mean, real hot. Kalamazoo, even Sturgis is an excellent place to do business in. But there's other areas that are just downright rotten, so.
Yeah. So on the Fay Bay Dune stuff more, with Global Link, which Fay Bay Dune was, her organization didn't even exist yet, and we appropriated, not me, but the government appropriated $20 million to give to her organization before it even existed. And then she filed and created her statement of organization or affidavit of identity. She created her organization after it was already had the money appropriated for it. She gets this massive salary. I think it might be $550,000 a year, $4,500 coffee maker that she got for herself. For her organization, she is like an $11,000 plane ticket to go overseas somewhere. Just exorbitant prices. Well, when she's going overseas for Global Link, whether it was A or B, more the attracting people off of free markets or more the bribing people to come to Michigan, whatever they're doing, I think it's more like B, but Roger, we can debate that. And so they go over there. It's Quentin Messer from the MEDC. He's in a lot of the photo ops. Fay Bay Dune goes overseas a lot. Gretchen Whitmer goes overseas a lot. They're going overseas, and they're trying to attract people with these special big payout deals at the taxpayers' expense. And that's the unfortunate reality of it. And that's what Faye Baden got the money for, was to be a global link, which sounds very close to global list, because it is quite synonymous, her operations. And there's nothing wrong with a German company or another company who wants to build and manufacture in America. That's a wonderful thing when they do that. But when it's off of this globalist link that is corporate handout deals and taxpayer-funded assistance, this isn't free enterprise. So Faye was hired for $20 million to do corrupt things, and that's just the reality of it.
How much can you claw back out of that?
I think there's about $8 million. I think it's about $8 million to $20 million.
Out of 20. And she got rid of $20 million. I mean, $14 million.
Yeah, it might be 12 million, or it might be part of that, and then part of it's just not clawbackable. I can't remember, but I think it's about 8 million.
And she'll get away scot-free?
Well, I mean, there are investigations into it. I mean, the Attorney General did raid her office, so we'll see what happens to Faye. She is in hot water a little bit. We'll see.
She's a big donor to Gretchen, so.
Huge Democrat donor. She's a huge Democrat donor.
And where did they get their money, her husband or whoever?
Faye?
Well, they must have money to start with, they were giving money to Gretchen.
Yeah, I don't know too much about her past.
Yeah.
Don't know too much about her past.
Family business or something.
Yeah, but they're certainly connected with the Democrat machine.
What's the name?
Faye Baden.
You can go.
And
Well,
then Paige.
my surprise is this $250 billion to make the site ready.
Million.
No, $1 million, or even $1 million to make the site ready. That means you're not gonna build anything, you're just gonna clear out the houses.
So far, yes, but I mean, in terms of infrastructure, for example, I'm just playing some devil's advocate, that train track that goes nearby on the northwest corner of the site would be about 300 or 400 feet from the train tracks. So they'd have to put in a frog point, so going off the train track and going down onto their site. So you're talking like a quarter mile or a half mile train track they'd need to put in to build into the train track system. So that would be site readiness.
A water tower.
A water tower would be just the pipelines for electricity to, any type of flattening the ground, which again, it is quite flat, so the amount of flattening they need to do isn't that much, but I guess there's different site readiness things other than bulldozing the houses. That little pond that it looks quite small. I don't know how big it is. Maybe it's 4 times the size of this building, if I had to guess. It's an acre pond, maybe.
So this is a 2 mile by 1 mile site?
Yeah.
I don't know, it just seems like a lot of money for a little piece of land, even doing all those things that you mentioned. I mean, it's, of course, that circle there on Lafayette and Frank's, that was $985,000. I don't understand why it costs that much for that whole circle. That doesn't make sense to me either, okay?
You got a giant one off by Featherstone over there.
Oh, yeah, no, 7 million lots.
So, to be a devil's advocate here, if we don't do it, somebody else will.
Another state, or country, but yeah,
So-
another state.
I guess I'm groping for any semblance of
Well, there were probably
something would benefit someone in the state of Michigan other than Whitmer and various other growing.
Not
Are
necessarily.
we looking at pure graft here, or are we looking at,
They call it Project Grit. I call it Project Grift. I have that in there.
because I understand the concept of, hey, this is a hot thing going on, and checks
It is.
obviously are a big deal right now.
It is a dog-eat-dog system that we have with the other states. If the other states are taking our money from Michigan and they're giving it to corporations, and then we never do it here, then all we ever have is money leaving Michigan. We don't have it coming back in. So it does create that dog-eat-dog system. Actually, this is off topic, but when Rick Snyder was governor, it was one One of my favorite early in my political endeavor career, this was probably 12 years ago, Medicaid expansion. I told him he was stuck between a rock and a hard place because the federal government was coercing the states into Medicaid expansion to where you provide Medicaid to 133% of the poverty line. And when you do that, and it's a lot of federal money coming into the state, if we say no to that in Michigan, then we turn down a bunch of money flowing into our state. But guess what happens with that program was over the course of years, the federal government pitched in less for the Medicaid expansion, and then it's left on our hook later. But for his short run, next couple of years where he's worried about for his election efforts that he cares about, the price was right then. So it was like he was put between a rock and a hard place, and then it creates this dog-eat-dog system, which I don't believe is consistent with the premise of the 10th Amendment of states' rights. You know, states should be able to freely make decisions without coercion and manipulation from the federal government. And I don't believe it's constitutional. I think this entire dog-eat-dog system that we have, it's central planning, I don't believe it's constitutional. And I think that nationwide, it sure would be nice to see a national effort to make it stop. I want to see somebody run for president who is going to talk about doing that nationally. Because people make that argument often, and it is a persuasive argument that, well, the other states are doing it, so we should do it too. Then why isn't anybody ever running for president saying, we all stop? We're going to all go back to free markets. We're going to stop central planning. We're going to respect the taxpayers of America and quit with this crony dog-eat-dog system.
What's going on with the $4.5 billion tax road fund stuff?
So the roads were $6.5 billion this current fiscal year. House has proposed a 3.1, maybe $3.4 billion increase to about $10 billion. So from 6.5 to $10 billion for the roads. That is a big increase in 1 year. It's very difficult to do that in an efficient way. I think we need to look at how we use existing funds. I talked about design build. Were you here when I talked design build maintain a couple months ago? So I believe design build maintain would have a long-term vested interest in the quality of their roads from the people who build them, and have them be responsible and accountable for the quality of their roads instead of just building it and going on to the next project and getting rehired. But the House, which is Republican control, and Gretchen Whitmer are pushing heavily for expansion and funding for the roads, and the Senate Democrats are in large part saying that's an excessive increase. Yeah, Democrats. But they're wanting that money for other things instead. You know, they're like, well, if we spend that much in roads and we can't give that much in welfare to these people, and we can't give that much in handouts to this and that. And so that creates a budgetary constraint. The House's proposal was $78.5 billion. I voted yes on the House's proposal for the budget. It was $82 billion last year. I thought that sounded quite fiscally conservative for 1 year to go from 82 to 78.5. It had some aspects in it I liked a lot. Some of it I didn't like as much, but it was a step in the right direction enough for me to vote yes, which was rare for me to vote yes on the budget bill. But anyway, so I thought that was good. An interesting aspect of it, though, was a lot of it was less federal money. But Gretchen Whitmer, looking at the state spending, which this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but makes me kind of think how much is the system already set up, and we're just kind of going through the motions and the smoke and mirrors, and our votes in the legislature don't even largely matter because it's going to be what it's going to be. Well, the House Fiscal Agency, they help us with the dollars of their revenue projections. So we're projected to get a certain amount of money next year. Well, the Democrats overhit with the revenue projections for the state money, because that federal money comes from the federal government. The state revenue is what we get from our taxes and whatnot that we pay the state, whether it's sales tax or income tax or property taxes.
Marijuana tax.
Well, yeah, you name it. Nickel dime tax. There's all kinds of taxes, all the taxes. And so all of that, it is around $49 billion in taxes to the state of Michigan, roughly. The House proposed 48.8 billion in spending of state revenue. The governor proposed 48.7, 100 million less, and the Democrats proposed 49.6, about 800 million more roughly than the governor and the House. But the House's plan included that big 3.1 to 3.4 billion dollar increase in road funding, whereas the governor's proposal of the 48.7 did not include. Her plan for more money for the roads would be to tax more and to get more revenue sources and to bring that number up about 3 billion more. So although ours is 100 million more than Whitmer's, it included 3.1 billion for the roads, so basically 3 billion less in other state revenue expenditures. Very heavy, probably hard to follow all those, but just getting a general idea from some of those concepts. Just thought I would share it with you guys as best as I could. And we normally have the budget done by July 1st. Here we are, September 8th, and we still haven't passed the budget. The fiscal year starts October 1st, so we have less than a month to go. Government shutdown if we don't have it. It's kind of in limbo whether or not it's going to get done by October 1st. Some people are saying it's looking good, it's going to happen. Other people, the most recent one I heard today was my staff had a meeting with the other, like the central staff, like attorneys and those people. So my staff said that the rumor they heard this morning is it's looking less likely as of this morning that it'll be done by October 1st. And the big wedge point that was heard this morning, kind of already mentioned, was the Democrats are very passionate that they want to see new revenue streams, taxes, or fees, or fine increases in order to fund a lot of what's missing from the big beautiful bill. So some of the federal money that's not coming to the state, they want to fill those voids by raising more money and having the state pick up the tab.
How can they raise money without you guys voting for them?
That's what the Democrats want commitment to do.
Well, they want you to vote for the increase in
Or,
something.
yeah, or at least for it to pass through the legislature, whether I vote for it or not.
And they only got a month.
And they want to see those revenue stream increases, those taxes and fines and fees increase to pay for more spending, to fill the void of what we're not getting from the big beautiful bill. And we want to just say, no, let's just press forward with what we have and not raise taxes and spend what we have here and, press forward with that. Meanwhile, I'm calling for getting rid of the 6 mills that we pay in property taxes for the state education tax, which is the part of the property tax that goes to the state of Michigan, which for homesteads equates to about $1.5 billion. For other property taxes, it adds up to about 3.1. So that's, so I'm calling for getting rid of the 6 mills that goes to the state.
And what's gonna replace that?
Less spending.
For less spending, but
My general argument is if we can pitch a $78.5 billion budget compared to an $84 billion budget, which is $5.5, $6 billion difference, we should be pitched $1.5 billion and less revenue necessary. So that's my argument and my push. And it sounds like I got commitment from I do have commitment from leadership that there's going to be a vote. Maybe not the full 6 mills, but hopefully. I don't want to overspeak too much, but the general idea is, at minimum, I want to see a phase out of the 6 mills for the state education tax. And that's supposed to happen, in terms of at least a vote in the House. But we're trying to navigate and see if there's something we can get across the finish line and sign into law and try to leverage to lower the tax, not just to vote in the House, but to get the Democrats on board. But we're pushing that way while the Democrats are pushing towards raising taxes. And so we'll see what shakes out from it, but pushing for the best.
I know you're about ready to wrap up, but I have a completely different question, totally unrelated to everything else. Secretary of State Benson is threatening to stop rules to prevent canvassing of the vote and limit the amount of data that people can get out of the qualified voter rolls.
JCAR is supposed to approve of that type of decision. JCAR would have, there's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican on the Senate side, because it's a joint committee, and there's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat on the House side. And so it's a split balance of power on JCAR. But my understanding, now JCAR lost a lot of its teeth though, under the Engler administration. So JCAR used to basically be able to stop any promulgated rule. Now it's more of recommendations, which basically from being able to do something to not be able to do anything.
They recommend, well, we recommend you don't do this.
But then to the legislature, that the legislature intervene or whatever. So I don't know the exact details on that. I know what you're talking about. There's something, I don't know if Patrick Colbeck was something out too with JCAR. If they don't have a quorum, like if the Democrats purposely don't show up from the Senate side, because I think you have to have a quorum from both the Senate and from the House in order to do business on JCAR. And it's basically assumed that if you don't have a quorum, that you basically endorsed the promulgated rule because you didn't show up to try to block it. Something to that extent. And we check what Colbeck's saying about it, but there is some potential activism that I would encourage you to see what Colbeck's up to, voice your thoughts and perspectives with that. I think when I saw Colbeck put that out, it was a little bit over my knowledge, but I was like, well, that's probably good that he put that on the record before the date of the meeting, just to kind of call them out on what they could do to play a game before it happened. So I'm giving you, I'm not an expert on JCAR, and partially accurate, double check what we're saying. Yes.
Okay, so with this property, was the local entity a part of it, or did the state just come in and say, hey, you're doing this, find a spot for it?
Mundy Township was involved in the process too, good question. So the former township supervisor was supportive. I believe had signed a non-disclosure agreement, I'm almost certain. And they were involved in terms of coming up with these decisions, yes. The new township supervisor is opposed, but the action is done prior to her being on. And the township manager is technically neutral, and he testified, and he was very professional. And I felt honest. Although he wasn't opposed, he's the township manager, and he's not opposed, and I think he probably would be looking at the dollars and cents. If you give that massive of a company a 50% tax abatement, but you still get 50% of the taxes, and you have all that taxpayer resources from the state of Michigan and the federal government coming into your township, it's like, yeah, give them a 50% tax abatement and have this massive new tax revenue stream from that massive company, which is going to be way more than you'd see from those hundreds of houses. And so I think the dollars and cents look very lucrative to your township decision makers. But the people in the community look beyond the dollars and cents, look at the environmental impact, the traffic on the roads, the eyesore from them not wanting an industrial site in their backyard, the cronyism of who's on the HOA board. There's all kinds of dynamics that go into it. But yeah, the township is involved.
Do you know roughly about what month this was done? Because I'd be interested in looking at their township meeting minutes.
Yeah, have fun with that. I believe it was around March of, was it 2024 or 2023? 2023 sounds right, but a year and a half ago sounds right. So it's one of those.
So between 2023 and 24, okay.
Spring
That's
of 23
that's
to
fine.
2024 is when you started ramping up, yes. Yep. And then the community knew just weeks or a month after, and by the time they started to say like, wait, what's going on? It was already full steam ahead and in motion, and largely nothing they could do with it.
And
They fight it, but
any super fun thing in the last 5 years since you've been around, whatever, and actually happened. I mean, you got the Ford thing, we don't think it's gonna happen in Marshall, it may happen. We got the Big Rapids thing, it's completely gone, we got this is gone. Are there any things that actually happened in this
You mean these big projects?
Yeah, any big
Well, I'm
project.
trying to remember, because there's been $200 million for the paper mill up in Escanaba, and I feel like that fell through too. Yeah, so a lot of these big projects, again, that's where that 9% number came from the Mackinac Center earlier, is we've had about 123,000 promised jobs and about 11,000 delivered. It's, yeah, these big projects have proven themselves to fail. Whether you agree with them or not, the local decisions tend to be, whether you agree with them or not, better than the big corporate, massive globalist ones.
Got one more budget question, Andy?
Yes.
Okay. Back to the fact that they don't have a budget voted on yet. And you're saying that the Democrats are holding it up because they want to tax this because of loss of revenue from
The big beautiful bill.
From the big beautiful bill.
Federal budget.
And I'm kind of jumping to the conclusion that Medicaid plays a part of that. And the plan on the federal end on Medicaid was to get people off of the rolls who did not belong there in the first place.
Like work requirements.
Yes. And so has the state of Michigan actually actively pursued relieving the rolls of Medicaid to thereby save money?
It is a topic of conversation in Lansing. Work requirements for able-bodied people is something that Republicans are obviously much more supportive of, and the Democrats are more like, you're a human being and it doesn't matter if you're able-bodied or not, get the taxpayer-funded assistance. And that just suppresses people into poverty. They need the opportunity to provide for themselves and their families, not for more handouts. Just like big corporations. Big corporations need the opportunity to provide for themselves and their company and a business-friendly environment instead of the handouts. Same thing applies with individuals. And, but yeah, whether it's the work requirements, we want those, and they want more revenue streams.
So we haven't made any cuts.
We have that big, we had the big dissension between our beliefs and their beliefs on that. There was a weird dynamic with the Senate proposed budget, which was over budget for the projections. Like they had, the money that they were proposing spending was beyond what we were able to fund, which because of that was going to have some people come off of Medicaid and everything. And then we end up with Republican talking points that are like, oh, look, they're trying to cut Medicaid for our vulnerable people. And it's just like, well, I don't necessarily want to go there with the messaging, because then it makes it sound like we support more Medicaid funding, and it kind of wedges us into being for more. It kind of brings us around in a weird way. I don't know if that makes sense, but it got a little bit dicey with that. This is off topic, but there was another one. Remember that tragedy at Michigan State University where there was the shooting up there? And that individual, I'm trying to remember what exactly happened. He had something that he had done. Oh, yes, that's what it was. He was concealed carrying a couple years earlier, and which is, you can get up to 5 years in prison for concealed carry without a CPL. Well, he was doing that, and he didn't get penalized for it. And so Republicans are making the argument, well, if we just followed the laws on the books, then that shooting would have never happened, because he was carrying concealed without a CPL, and therefore if he was in prison for 5 years, he never would have gone, and the tragedy wouldn't have happened at Michigan State. But my thought was, why are we making that talking point? Because we as Republicans who support the right to keep and bear arms are opposed to the idea of needing to get permission to put a coat on. If you can carry open carry, you should be able to carry concealed, and you shouldn't have to pay a fee in order to exercise your right to keep and bear arms. So why are we saying that if we just follow the laws on the books, he'd be in prison where he belongs, if we don't believe that he should be in prison for carrying concealed?
It's too convoluted.
But that's the type of thing that our Republican leaders do. And I'm like, no, guys, like, you're sounding like gun grabbers, or you're sounding like welfare queens, you know, like trying to protect Medicaid, or trying to go after gun grabs, we just follow the law. And almost all of them will get into that messaging talking point. And I feel fault them on the other end. I'm just like, oh no, we have way too much government spending, people need to work, be able-bodied, go out and get a job. Like, sorry, not sorry, but I believe in free markets and equal opportunity. That's the American dream. Provide for yourself and your family. We need to follow the principles that our founding fathers had and go back to the basics. That's where I make my mistakes. So, anyway, yeah, it doesn't win me over some people sometimes, but I think when we have a long, thorough dialogue and can talk through the concepts better, that's where we can start with our tools and knowledge and understand these things more. And I certainly don't know everything, but the proper role of government is one thing I like to talk about a lot. And
You know, Steve, there was today's Epic Times that I just looked at when I had lunch, has a map of all the states that provide, when you have illegal students, I mean, they're illegal in our country, but they're going to a university or college, they pay in-state tuition, where out-of-state students have to pay a higher amount. And also, they get funding from the state to attend college, and they're not even a legal citizen. So they have all, the map, it's a colored map with, they have different regulations. So Michigan is one of the ones that I guess allows.
so not only getting benefits, but getting better benefits.
Yeah, they're getting better benefits than out-of-state students, and I don't know, I just don't think that's right, and I don't know how anybody can say that is right, okay?
Yep.
It's wrong.
I agree. Well, hopefully our next town hall, we have a budget done by that point, because that'll be October. Second Monday, as always. So, second Monday in October, 6:30, we'll be back here.
What is the government shutdown?
What will it do? Good question. I'll learn more about that in the next few weeks in terms of what it do. But normally the first things that happen are the biggest, like, controversial things, like the veterans aren't gonna get paid, or, you know, it's like the tragedy things, like the world's falling apart. Those are the first things. And will I still get my paycheck if the government shuts down? Probably. That's the line, you know, it's like the first thing that should be cut is if we're not doing our job, getting to a consensus. Yeah, that's what it's gonna